Hello people of YouTube, it's Deepak here and welcome to DCS World 2.7.2 and Eagle Dynamics F-16C Viper module. Welcome to tutorial 8, the Litening AT targeting pod. Today we're going to look at the basic functionality of the Litening AT in its air-to-ground mode. It also has an air-to-air mode, which we'll cover in a subsequent tutorial. The F-16 is a somewhat unique aircraft in that it actually has pylons dedicated for carrying pods. These are called the cheek stations, and the Litening AT by default is carried on the right cheek station as seen here. These cheek stations are just mounted on the underside of the air intake for the engine. So that is a Litening AT pod there, fitted to the right cheek station. That's in fact the only location on which you can mount the targeting pod on the F-16. And the Litening AT is basically the same as the Litening II that you'll find on the A10C and the AV-8B Harrier. It's a slightly modernised version of the Litening II, but capabilities wise it's very, very similar. And you'll see that functionality wise it's pretty much the same as well. Today we're going to take a little flight towards the range, and I will show you the ways in which you can use the area track, the point track, and all the other modes of the pod. So I'm going to get the aircraft started up, and then I will join you all en route to the range. Okay, welcome back. We're in the cockpit, aircraft started up and in the air, and we're now en route to the range. So, just so you're aware, the setup for this mission is that I have steer point 1, which is the eastern bomb circle, shown here. If I cycle to steer point 2, I've got the western bomb circle, and if I cycle to steer point 3, I've got my gun strafe targets. This is going to be important because by default the pod is going to point towards the current sensor point of interest. Which will be by default your steer point. In the future it will be possible to designate a SPI using the air-to-ground radar or the Litening AT targeting pod itself, but at this stage in early access you're mostly going to be doing it via steer points. Of course in the future it will also be possible to use mark points, which are very important, but we don't have those yet either. At least I don't think we do. Yes, mark under development. So, let's go back to the main page. So, first things first, let's see how we get the aircraft set up to use the targeting pod. First, well, of course, we'll have completed a normal startup, so all the standard systems are turned on. An important subsystem required for the targeting pod, well, if you exclude all the major stuff like the INS and the GPS, is the radar altimeter. So make sure that your radar altimeter is on. Go to air-to-ground mode, and by default on the right multifunction display you're going to have a page for targeting pod. So let's just center down on this for a moment. I've loaded bombs on the aircraft, but they are absolutely unnecessary for the purposes of this demonstration. So I could just click targeting pod, or I could press display management switch right to flip through my predefined pages. I've got SMS, horizontal situation display, and targeting pod. In the event that I was missing the targeting pod from one of these pages, I could simply click the page that I want to reprogram and then choose it from the list. In this case, I want the targeting pod. And straight away we notice we've got a problem. Oh my god, the targeting pod is off. So how do we control that? The cheek stations have individual power switches down here on the right hand console. So you can see we've got left hard point, right hard point. We want to power on the right hard point. So with that powered on, we'll give it a few moments, but eventually the targeting pod is going to start powering up. And because it has both a daytime camera, a CCD, and a forward-looking infrared, a FLIR camera, it needs to go through a self-test and a cooling cycle, very much like the Maverick missiles do in fact. So the startup time for the targeting pod is approximately 3 minutes. Here we go, so it's gone through that first bit of power on. It's now saying not timed out, and it's not currently sensor of interest, and it's in standby. I'm going to leave that doing that for now because it's going to take a little bit longer, and while that's happening I'm going to go over to the left hand side and we're going to master arm on, and we're going to arm the laser. This means we're now going to have full functionality of the pod, and we'll be able to laze targets and track and so on. Next thing we're going to do is we want to make sure that our laser code is set correctly. Very important, especially in multiplayer. So we can do that via the DED. If I press list to go to the main list page, I want to go to miscellaneous, which is 0, and then I want to go to laser, which is 5. And in here we can enter the code that the targeting pod will emit, but also the code that the targeting pod will search for in laser spot track mode. For the purposes of this mission, we'll use 1689, I guess. That's going to be fine. So the dauber up and down allows you to choose which one you're editing, and then you just type in the box. 1689, dauber down. Oh, actually, no, you have to enter. 1689, enter. There you go, and then it flashes. Which I guess means I've typed in an unacceptable code. Yeah. 1687, enter. There we go. Okay, right, so 1689 is an unacceptable code, and we're going to go 1687, enter. I guess I should really look these things up before I start demonstrating them. So 1687 for both the code that we're going to transmit and the code that we're going to look for. I can now hit return to go back to my main page. You can now see that actually the targeting pod has, indeed, finished powering up. Let's zoom right down on the pod. And the very first thing it's going to say is not soy. And this is our standard thing. We need to press display management switch aft once, and then we're going to have the white box around it, and we're now controlling the pod. So very first thing to note is that it starts off in standby, and in standby mode, let's jump outside. In standby mode, the pod should be stowed, but actually that's a bug, because look, the camera is looking forwards. The camera should be looking back in on itself when it's in standby mode. So I'm going to assume that's a bug. I don't think it's supposed to operate that way, but anyway, press standby and you get options for other modes. And normally you'd have air to ground and air to air. Currently only air to ground mode is implemented. So choose air to ground, and straight away we have some video there, and this is the CCD camera by default. So let's go through the different push button controls that we have, and then we'll look at the symbology as well. So first thing is, of course, the mode. We're currently in air to ground. Man is allowing us to toggle between automatic and manual handoff, and this controls how you can send targeting information to the Maverick missiles. We're going to cover that in a separate tutorial later. Manual mode basically means that you have to manually trigger a handoff to the Maverick, and automatic means that when you go into a point track, it's going to try and send targeting information to your Mavericks. Wide is the current field of view. We're in wide. This box here shows you what your narrow field of view would be, and I can go narrow and then back to wide. Override allows you to toggle between standby and the currently selected mode without having to toggle through other modes. So if I press override now, it's going to go straight to standby, and if I come out of override, it's immediately going to return me to air to ground. So it's just a way of quickly toggling on and off, really. Control is going to bring up all of our controls, basically, for fiddling with the pod, currently not implemented. TV, this push button allows us to flip between the normal CCD, the TV, white hot and black hot modes of the forward-looking infrared, and then back to normal daytime TV. NT this is about the mode of tracking used for the point track mode. NT is neutral track, so it means it will target either very, very dark or very, very bright white objects. And I guess that's only available in FLIR modes, or actually it's not implemented at all. Normally you'd have the option for neutral track, white track and black track. That's not implemented, it would seem. SP will put us straight into snowplow mode, and that basically just means the pod will be fixed looking straight ahead, and all we can do is basically move the pod by manoeuvring the whole aircraft. I think by default it's looking at the flight path marker, so you could fly to put your flight path marker on your target and then press TMS forward, and that will then ground stabilize it, and then you can start slewing it. You cannot slew the pod in snowplow mode, you can only move it by moving the whole aircraft, if that makes sense. CZ is cursor 0, so it will immediately return the pod to the current sensor point of interest. So you're basically just recentering the pod on what you were originally looking at if you'd been slewing it around. Bottom controls are standard, of course. You've got your 3 selected pages, you've got declutter, and you've got swap to swap your left and right multifunction displays. Left hand side here we've got grey. That just puts a grey scale on the bottom of the screen. This actually helps you in adjusting things like your gain and symbology brightness, contrast, all that kind of stuff, to get basically the image you want. You can see that we're actually not seeing the difference between some of these later boxes, and so we would maybe want to adjust the display until we got a view that we wanted, and then we can turn it off. So it's just for calibration. And then automatic and manual gain control. This allows us, most importantly in the FLIR modes, to adjust the gain of the infrared camera to get the kind of image that we want in different conditions. And then of course once we've adjusted that the way we want it, we probably also want to adjust our symbology so that we can still see it properly. I'm not sure how much of this is actually implemented. It looks like it's not quite working correctly. This is of course early access, and so there are going to be refinements to the pod. So those are the controls all the way around the outside. Then we've got symbology. So symbology inside here, top left we have the current coordinates and elevation of the current sensor point of interest, so basically where we're looking right now. We have the current zoom level, we're at 0 zoom, and it's possible to zoom in and out using the radar cursor controls. Current aircraft altitude in feet. We have our current laser code for laser spot search. We have the length of the lines basically on our cursor here. It has a benchmark, the benchmark lines. So at the zoom level that we're at, looking at the point on the ground that we're looking at, this line is 231 meters, which is quite useful to know. And then down here we have the watermark. This basically shows us the nose of the aircraft and a line showing us the direction towards the sensor point of interest. So it's telling us that at the present time our steer point, which is our current sensor point of interest, is slightly to the left off of the nose. And then we also have, it's a little bit obscured right now, but we have our situational awareness cue. This little diamond up here, it's basically telling us that the pod is looking straight forwards. If it was here, the pod would be looking to the left, to the right, to the aft, and if it was in the middle, it'd be looking straight down. And so it can go around the outside, but then as we angle it down, it will move closer towards the middle of the display as well. We also have L for laser, and that's simply letting us know that the state of the laser. The laser is currently armed, but it's not firing. When the laser is firing, this L will flash. Okay, next, let's take a little look at the controls using the HOTAS to control the pod. By default, your cursor slew controls are going to slew the pod. Actually, I was about to say as long as the pod is sensor of interest, but I think I was actually in the HUD cursor there. So yeah, make sure that you actually have the pod as your sensor of interest, and then slewing left, right, up and down will control the pod. Pressing your expand FOV button will allow you to flip between narrow and wide fields of view. I'm going to press cursor 0 and then zoom in, and yes, that should immediately have me looking at the eastern bomb circle. You then have the controls that would normally manually control your range on the radar, also will control the manual zoom on the pod. And we have options to go all the way down to 9 times zoom. So that's me zoomed in on the eastern bomb circle. If I was actually to cycle, I'm actually have to zoom out a little bit. If I was to cycle steer points here, the pod immediately moves. You can actually hardly tell at this zoom level. Let me actually bring it out a little. If I cycle the steer points, there you go. And then the strafe pits. So as I move my steer points while I'm in cursor 0, so say I haven't slewed, it's going to immediately move the pod to that sensor point of interest. Let's get zoomed back down here again. Next control, you've got the uncage switch. If you press uncage, it's going to immediately put you into laser spot search, and you can tell that because your LSS is boxed. Tapping it again will return you to the normal mode that you were in previously. Target management switch, we've got target management switch forward or up, will immediately put you into a point track. This is perfect for moving vehicles, or actually any kind of smaller object. It's going to use a contrast track just on that particular object. TMS right is going to put you into area track, and this is perfect for tracking either buildings, larger objects, or even just a point on the ground. I can slew the pod to just a point on the ground, let go, and it's going to remain in area track, and even as my aircraft maneuvers, it's going to track that point. TMS left is going to toggle between the different cameras, so I'm on TV, white hot mode, black hot mode, and back to TV. And then TMS aft or down is going to go into target reject. And in target reject mode, we're now not tracking at all. And if I press target reject again, TMS aft again, that effectively does cursor 0, so I'm right back at my steer point. And that's basically everything that you can do with that. Gun trigger is actually going to fire the laser, so if I pull the first detent of the trigger, it actually just fired for a moment. I in fact have to hold it down. And you can see it's confirming the laser code at the bottom there, L1687, and the L is flashing. And when I release, the laser stops firing. And TGT, now that's an interesting one. What does that do? I actually don't know what that does. That's an interesting one. Okay, so one thing to note, while you have a target point selected, so yeah, I've got this in area track, we now have a time at the bottom right here, 2 minutes 10 seconds. It has 3 different modes that it can operate in, so if you don't have weapons ready to go, that's simply time to fly over that point. So in 2 minutes and 10 seconds, I'll overfly that target. If you have a weapon selected ready to release, it's the time to release, and if you have already released a weapon, it's the time until impact. And that's basically how that works. What I'm going to do now is quickly zoom out for just a moment, and let's have a little look at the HUD, because the box that you see on the HUD is the current position where the targeting pod is looking. So that's useful to know. And the steering line is the CCRP standard steering line. So it's going to give you steering information towards wherever the targeting pod is looking. Now, one quick thing to note, this is all achieved while we have a weapon in CCRP. Note that if I switch a weapon to CCIP, the pod will only ever look at the pipper. So I now don't have control over the pod. I can't slew it, I can still zoom it, of course, and I can still change the field of view, but let's quickly take the aircraft out of active pause. You can see that the pod is only ever following that pipper. So in this mode, the targeting pod is really only useful for getting a better look at what it is you're just about to destroy. If I tap my nose wheel steering and tap it again to get back into CCRP, now I've got normal traditional control of the pod. And then one last thing that I'm going to show is I'm going to press, snowplow is not available. If I press TMS aft, there we go. Now I get SP, I can press SP, and now the targeting pod is in snowplow mode. And in snowplow mode, it's supposed to move with the aircraft. But it's actually not working correctly. And in this mode I cannot slew, so it's going to look at whatever it wants to look at. That's interesting. If I now put it into CCIP, yeah, it's really not working correctly in snowplow mode. As I said before, this is early access. This is in fact probably the most early access part of the module, so I'm almost certainly at some point soon going to have to revise this video because the functionalities of the pod will change. But the basics, certainly for CCIP and CCRP delivery, are working just fine. So that actually concludes all the standard functionality of the Litening AT targeting pod in the F-16C. I hope that you all enjoyed that. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like and comment as always, and I'll see you all next time.